June 5, 1944, Portsmouth, England. A single sheet of paper lay on Dwight D. Eisenhower's desk, already signed. The room was quiet in the way command rooms become just before history breaks open. Outside, the English Channel rolled under low clouds, slate-grey water striking the sides of thousands of ships waiting in darkness. The air inside smelled of damp wool ink and old cigarette smoke. Somewhere in the building, a telephone rang once, then stopped. Eisenhower did not move to answer it. He sat alone, jacket unbuttoned, shoulders heavy, staring at the paper in front of him. The words were spare, fewer than 60. No rhetoric, no attempt to soften what they meant. He had written them deliberately that way. The sentence at the top read, "Our landings in the Cherbourg-Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold." Eisenhower read it again, slowly. Then the next line. He did not cross anything out. He did not revise, he did not hesitate. At the bottom of the page, his name sat in firm, unembellished ink. D. Eisenhower. This was not a speech. It was not meant to inspire. It was meant to explain a disaster that had not yet happened. If the invasion failed, if the beaches became killing grounds, if the airborne divisions vanished into the Norman hedgerows, if German armor reached the coast in time, this letter would be released to the world. It would tell parents why their sons had not come home, and it would tell them who was responsible. Eisenhower folded the paper once, then again. He slipped it into his pocket. Outside, engines rumbled as ships began to move. The greatest armada ever assembled was already underway. Eisenhower leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He had less than 12 hours left. The decision itself had come only hours earlier. At 4:15 that morning, Eisenhower stood inside a cramped room at Southwick House, the nerve center of the invasion. Maps covered the walls, layered with colored pins and tape. Each pin marked a unit. Each unit meant thousands of men. Weather officers delivered their final report. High winds, rough seas, cloud cover thick enough to scatter aircraft and blind bombers. Conditions that could drown soldiers before they reached shore, or drop paratroopers into the wrong fields entirely. The invasion had already been delayed once. Every postponement risked discovery. Every hour trapped tens of thousands of men inside ships, nerves fraying, bodies weak, minds racing ahead to gunfire they had not yet heard. Eisenhower listened. He asked questions. He paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. Then he stopped. "I am quite positive," he said quietly. "We must give the order." There was no dramatic pause, no flourish. Just a sentence that sent nearly 7,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and over 150,000 men into motion. The machinery of war began turning, and it could not be stopped. Now, hours later, the meaning of that sentence sat with him in a silent room. 4 years earlier, Eisenhower had been a colonel, a staff officer without combat command. He had never led men into battle. He had never watched soldiers die because of an order he gave. His reputation had been built on organization, diplomacy, and the ability to work with difficult personalities. By 1944, those skills had lifted him into a role no Allied commander had ever held. Britain had endured the Blitz. The Soviet Union had shattered itself, stopping Hitler in the East. The United States had transformed its factories into engines of war. Everything had led here, to this crossing of water, this attempt to break open Fortress Europe. If it failed, the consequences would not be theoretical. There would be no second attempt that year. Public support could collapse. Stalin might make his own decisions. Germany would have time to reinforce the coast beyond breaking point. Eisenhower had seen the casualty estimates. He had signed the orders, and now he had written the letter. The paper itself was unremarkable. No official letterhead, no decoration, just a blunt acknowledgement of failure, written before failure existed. In his exhaustion, he had dated it June 5th. Later, historians would notice the mistake. In that moment, the date hardly mattered. What mattered was the sentence near the end. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. Not the weather, not the planners, not the troops mine. Years later, Eisenhower would rarely speak about the letter. He did not dramatize it or turn it into legend. He simply acknowledged that it felt necessary. Because for the first time since accepting command, the outcome was no longer abstract. It was imminent. While Eisenhower sat in Portsmouth, men were already leaving England behind. Paratroopers stood inside aircraft, Parachutes hooked, faces darkened with grease. Some prayed, some joked too loudly. Some stared at the floor. Engines roared, and aircraft lifted into cloud that would scatter formations and drop men miles from their intended zones. On the channel, infantry packed into landing craft clutched rifles between their knees as waves slammed hulls hard enough to knock men off balance. Seasickness spread, the smell of fuel mixed with fear. None of them knew about the letter. They believed the Supreme Commander was confident, certain in control. And in public, Eisenhower had been exactly that. He had visited units days earlier, smiling, asking where the men were from. He had told paratroopers they would write history. He had told commanders he had full faith in their troops. Confidence, he understood, was not the same thing as certainty. Across the channel, German commanders waited, but not where the Allies would land. Hitler slept late, convinced the real invasion would strike at Calais. Armored divisions remained held back, waiting for authorization that would come too slowly. Eisenhower did not know any of this. He did not know deception had worked. He did not know the enemy was divided. All he knew was that the dice were rolling, and if they landed wrong, history would demand a name. Near midnight, Eisenhower stood and put on his jacket. He checked his pockets and felt the folded paper still there. He did not remove it. He did not tear it up. He walked out into the night as the invasion moved forward without him. There was nothing left to command, only to wait. By dawn, the beaches of Normandy would erupt in fire and chaos. By nightfall, the world would know whether the letter would remain hidden or be read aloud to a stunned public. For now it was just paper, and the man who wrote it could do nothing more. The night stretched on without relief. Eisenhower slept little, if at all. When he did close his eyes, it was only for minutes at a time, his mind pulling him back to consciousness with the same unanswered question again and again. Is it working? The letter stayed in his pocket. He did not check it. He did not need to. Its weight was constant. By the early hours of June 6th, reports began to trickle in, fragmented and incomplete. Radios crackled with static. Signals officers leaned over maps, pencils hovering, waiting for confirmations that did not come. Airborne units were supposed to land cleanly behind enemy lines, seize bridges, block German counterattacks. Instead, the first messages spoke of chaos. Aircraft scattered by cloud and flak. Men dropped miles from their intended zones. Paratroopers drowning under the weight of their gear. Others landing alone in hedgerows or flooded fields, firing blindly into the dark. Eisenhower listened without interruption. He asked no questions at first. He simply absorbed the words as they came. Each report stripped away a layer of abstraction. These were no longer arrows on maps. They were men, isolated and bleeding, trying to assemble under fire. At sea, the situation was no clearer. Naval commanders reported heavy swells, landing craft struggling to hold formation, soldiers vomiting over the sides before they ever saw land. Some boats turned back, engines failing, men shivering and ashamed, convinced they had already failed before the battle began. Shortly before dawn, Eisenhower stood in the operations room, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the massive wall map of Normandy. The beaches were marked with code names that still sounded almost harmless. Utah, Omaha.gold, Juno.sword. Clean words for places that were about to become something else entirely. The first reports from the beaches were delayed. When they came, they were uneven, often contradictory. Utah Beach appeared to be going better than expected. The current had pushed the landing force off course, but German resistance was lighter there. Losses were heavy but manageable. Eisenhower allowed himself no reaction. It was too early. Then came Omaha. The words arrived slowly, filtered through layers of confusion and censorship. Landing craft destroyed before reaching shore. Infantry pinned down by machine gun fire from bluffs they could not reach. Tanks sinking in deep water. Officers killed before issuing a single order. Entire units frozen on the beach, unable to move forward, unable to retreat. For the first time since giving the order, Eisenhower spoke sharply. He asked for clarification. He demanded specifics. How bad was it? Could they advance? Could they hold? The answers were uncertain. Some commanders believed the beach might have to be abandoned. Others insisted small groups were pushing inland. No one could say which version was true. Eisenhower turned away from the map. In another room, Away from the staff, he lit a cigarette and stared out a window at the grey English morning. The channel was invisible from here, but he knew what was happening on the other side of it. He knew the sound of machine guns would already be constant. He knew men were dying in places they would never be able to describe. The letter pressed against his chest. At this hour, if the invasion failed, there was nothing he could do to change it. He could not reinforce fast enough. He could not withdraw cleanly. He could only watch as events decided whether the gamble would pay off or collapse into catastrophe. He thought of the men he had spoken to days earlier, paratroopers grinning for photographs, infantrymen writing last letters home. He thought of the responsibility he had accepted when he took the command, knowing that no preparation, no planning, no intelligence could eliminate chance. Chance now ruled everything. By mid-morning, new reports arrived. Small breakthroughs at Omaha, destroyers moving dangerously close to shore, firing directly into German positions to relieve pinned-down infantry, engineers blowing gaps in wire and mines under fire, men advancing not in formations, but in scattered groups, crawling, running, surviving. Eisenhower allowed himself a single exhale. This was not victory, not yet, but it was movement. As the hours passed, the picture slowly changed. Gold, Juno and Sword beaches were secure, though costly. British and Canadian units were pushing inland, meeting fierce resistance but holding ground. Airborne units, scattered and bloodied, were linking up, improvising missions, fighting as small bands rather than divisions. The invasion was holding. Still, Eisenhower did not remove the letter. He understood how quickly the balance could shift. A strong German counterattack, a panzer division released too late, bad weather returning to strand the beaches without reinforcements. Nothing was guaranteed, not yet. The letter remained folded, untouched. By the afternoon of June 6th, the invasion existed in a fragile in-between state, neither triumph nor disaster, suspended on a narrow edge that could still cut either way. Eisenhower knew this better than anyone. He had seen too many operations unravel after early promise to mistake survival for success. Beaches could be held and still be lost. Footholds could be gained and still be crushed. Reports continued to arrive, more coherent now, but no less grim. Casualty numbers climbed steadily, each update adding weight to the room. At Omaha, entire companies had ceased to exist as fighting units. Junior officers, lieutenants, sergeants, sometimes privates, were leading what remained, making decisions far beyond their training, because there was no one else left to make them. The beach was littered with wreckage, twisted steel, burning vehicles, bodies caught in the surf, and dragged back and forth by the tide. Eisenhower stood over the map again, his eyes returning to Omaha despite every effort to look elsewhere. It was the hinge. If Omaha failed, the American beaches would be split. Logistics would fracture. German counterattacks would find space to maneuver. The entire invasion could begin to unravel, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow grinding erosion of possibility. He asked quietly whether evacuation was still being considered. No one answered immediately. The silence was answer enough. Naval officers explained that pulling men off the beach under fire would be almost as deadly as leaving them there. The landing craft were already damaged or sunk. Smoke obscured the shoreline. Communications were unreliable. If they withdrew now, thousands would die in the attempt, and the psychological blow would be irreparable. Eisenhower nodded. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. The decision had already made itself. They would hold. Across the channel, German commanders were beginning to react, but not with the speed Eisenhower feared. Confusion reigned there too. Reports contradicted one another. Some officers insisted the landings were feints. Others warned this was the main effort. Requests to release armored reserves moved slowly upward, trapped in a chain of command that demanded Hitler's personal approval. Hitler, meanwhile, slept. Eisenhower did not know that. He only knew that every hour without a decisive counterattack increased the Allies' chances. Time, which had been the enemy in the morning, now became something to cling to. By early evening, the tone of the reports changed almost imperceptibly. Not optimistic, never optimistic, but steadier. Supply dumps were forming on the beaches. Artillery was coming ashore. Engineers were clearing exits. The beachheads, thin and bloody, were expanding. Still, Eisenhower waited. He did not celebrate. He did not allow relief to settle in fully. He had learned long ago that premature confidence was its own kind of enemy. Too many battles were lost after commanders convinced themselves the worst had passed. The letter stayed where it was. Late that night, Eisenhower finally allowed himself to leave the operations room. He walked alone through the corridors, his footsteps echoing softly. The building felt hollow now, emptied of the tension that had filled it for days, replaced by something quieter and heavier. In a small room, he removed his jacket and reached into the pocket where the paper had rested all day. He unfolded it slowly, smoothing the creases with his thumb. The words were unchanged. The meaning, however, had begun to shift. The invasion had not failed. Not yet. Eisenhower read the letter one last time. He did not tear it up. He did not throw it away. He folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. There it would remain unseen for years. Outside in Normandy, the fighting continued through the night. Men dug in under fire. Medics worked without rest. The beaches, once killing grounds, were becoming something else. Ugly, unstable, but real. The gamble had not paid off cleanly. It had paid off barely. And Eisenhower understood that the war was far from over. But something irreversible had happened. A door that had been closed for 4 years was now open, even if only by inches. He sat down heavily, exhaustion finally winning. For the first time since giving the order, the weight in his chest eased. Not relief, but survival. Morning came slowly on June 7th, filtered through exhaustion and disbelief. Eisenhower woke to the sound of movement in the headquarters corridors. Boots on stone, low voices. The war continuing without pause. The invasion had survived its first day. That fact alone felt unreal. He dressed without ceremony, the stiffness in his body a reminder that tension does not leave cleanly. It drains, then lingers. New reports awaited him. They were clearer now. No longer fragments shouted into radios, but structured assessments. The beachheads were connected in places. Supplies were flowing ashore in greater volume. The Mulberry harbors were beginning to take shape, fragile but functioning. German resistance remained fierce, but the feared mass counterattack had not materialized. Eisenhower read everything. He made notes in the margins. He asked questions. Outwardly, he was again the commander, measured, composed, decisive. Inwardly, something had shifted. The moment of absolute uncertainty had passed. The moment the letter had been written for was receding. He did not speak about it. There was no announcement, no acknowledgement to his staff that he had prepared words for failure. The letter remained private, its existence known only to him and eventually a few historians who would find it years later in his papers. At the time, Eisenhower understood instinctively that leadership sometimes meant carrying things no one else should have to see. Across Normandy, the cost of that leadership was written in bodies. Casualty figures climbed into the tens of thousands. Hospitals overflowed. Chaplains moved among the wounded, offering words that often felt inadequate. Units that had landed at full strength were now shadows of themselves, still fighting, still advancing but permanently altered. Eisenhower followed the progress obsessively. He marked advances measured in yards. He tracked German divisions moving toward the front. He watched the battle for Caen develop into a grinding struggle he knew would take weeks, not days. The war was resuming its familiar shape, slow, brutal, resistant to grand visions. Yet something fundamental had changed. For the first time since 1940, Allied armies were fighting on the soil of Western Europe. The psychological weight of that fact was immense. It pressed not just on the enemy, but on Eisenhower himself. The letter he had written assumed a future in which this moment had failed. That future was now closing. Days passed, then weeks. The beachheads expanded. The hedgerow fighting proved worse than expected. Progress was costly, uneven, and often disappointing. Eisenhower absorbed criticism from all sides. Too cautious, too slow, too optimistic before the landings, too conservative afterward. He accepted it all with the same outward calm. Privately, he reflected on how close everything had come to collapse. He did not romanticize it. There was no sense of destiny fulfilled. Victory, he understood now more than ever, was fragile and temporary. It demanded constant renewal. The letter had been an acknowledgement of that truth, written in advance, stripped of illusion. When Eisenhower finally returned to the drawer where he had placed it, weeks later, he did not linger. He did not reread it. He simply ensured it was still there, then closed the drawer again. The words no longer needed to be spoken. Their purpose had been served. Years later, when the letter became public, Readers would marvel at its humility, its clarity, its restraint. They would see it as evidence of character, of moral courage, of leadership at its finest. Eisenhower himself would never frame it that way. For him, it was simply a recognition of reality as it existed on the night of June 5, 1944, a moment when the future was unknowable, the risk absolute and responsibility indivisible. On that night, before anyone knew how the beaches would run with blood or hold under fire, Eisenhower had said what needed to be said, to himself. And then he had gone on. The weeks after D-Day settled into a rhythm that was anything but steady. Eisenhower watched the Normandy campaign unfold with a growing awareness that survival had only been the first test. Breakout was another matter entirely. The hedgerows slowed armor to a crawl. German resistance hardened where it had not collapsed. Progress was measured in fields, villages, crossroads, whose names meant nothing before they were soaked in blood. Every morning brought new casualty figures. Eisenhower read them without comment, though they never became abstract. Numbers still meant men, men meant families. The scale was now too large to absorb emotionally, but he did not let himself forget what each line represented. He had written a letter, accepting responsibility for failure. Success, he understood, carried its own form of responsibility, quieter but no less heavy. Criticism intensified as the campaign dragged on. Some commanders wanted bolder moves, others urged caution. Political leaders asked when the breakthrough would come, when the war in the West would finally begin to feel decisive. Eisenhower listened, mediated, absorbed. His greatest skill was not brilliance in maneuver, but endurance, emotional, political, personal. He stayed where the pressure converged and let it break against him instead of those below. The letter remained out of sight but not out of mind. It had changed something in him. Writing it had stripped away any lingering illusion that command could ever be shared when things went wrong. Responsibility, once accepted at that level, did not disperse. It stayed concentrated. The invasion had succeeded, but the logic of the letter still applied. Every decision that followed carried echoes of that night in Portsmouth. In late July, when Operation Cobra finally broke the German lines, Eisenhower felt no surge of triumph. Relief came first, muted and brief, then calculation, then concern about how quickly victory could outrun discipline. War had taught him that success bred its own dangers. Momentum could conceal mistakes until they were too large to correct. As Allied forces poured across France, Eisenhower's role shifted again. The desperate waiting of early June was gone, replaced by the strain of managing success without losing control of it. He was criticized for spreading forces too broadly, praised for maintaining unity among egos that might otherwise fracture the coalition. Through it all, he remained publicly calm, privately vigilant. He never spoke of the letter during the war. Not to his staff, not to politicians, not even to those closest to him. It belonged to a moment that no longer existed, a moment of pure uncertainty that could not be revisited without distorting it. To explain it while the war continued would have been to invite misinterpretation or worse, sentimentality. Only after the war, when the stakes had receded into history, did the letter emerge. When it did, it surprised people, not because it existed, but because of what it said so plainly. No blame shifted, no excuses offered, just a statement of accountability written before the outcome was known. By then, Eisenhower was already becoming something else, a symbol, a statesman, eventually a president. The letter did not fit easily with those later identities. It belonged to a man alone in a quiet room waiting for dawn, uncertain whether he had just doomed an entire generation. That version of Eisenhower never disappeared. It stayed with him, shaped him, grounded him. The war had rewarded him with victory, but it was that earlier night, when victory was only a possibility, that revealed who he was under the weight of it all. The beaches of Normandy would become legend. The landings would be studied, commemorated, simplified. But the letter remained what it had always been, a private reckoning with failure that never came, and a reminder that leadership is defined not by certainty, but by what one is willing to own when certainty vanishes. Years later, when the war had ended, and the noise of it had faded into memory, Dwight Eisenhower sat in quieter rooms than the one in Portsmouth. The maps were gone, the pins were gone. The voices demanding decisions at impossible speed had been replaced by advisors, schedules, ceremonies. He had won the war in Europe. History had already begun to simplify him. It was only then that the letter resurfaced. It was found among his papers, folded, dated June 5, 1944, written in his own hand. When it became public, readers were struck not by what it revealed about D-Day, but by what it revealed about Eisenhower. There was no hedging, no conditional language, no effort to distribute responsibility across weather, intelligence, or chance. Just ownership stated in advance when no one could have demanded it. For the public, the letter became a symbol. For Eisenhower, it was never that. It was a moment captured in ink, nothing more. A moment when the future had been completely opaque, when success and catastrophe were separated by inches of water and minutes of time. On the night he wrote it, Eisenhower did not know he would one day be remembered as a great commander, or a president, or a figure carved into monuments. He did not know the invasion would succeed. He did not know the beaches would hold. He knew only that if it failed, there had to be an answer to the question that would come next. Who was responsible? He had already written the response. The letter was never released. It never needed to be. The men who landed on the beaches held long enough. The enemy faltered. The door into Europe stayed open. History moved forward along a path that made the letter unnecessary, but its existence mattered, because it revealed the truth of that moment more clearly than any victory report ever could. The truth that command at its highest level is not confidence without doubt, but action taken in full awareness of doubt. The truth that leadership is not defined by the outcome alone, but by what one is prepared to carry if the outcome goes wrong. On June 5, 1944, Dwight Eisenhower did not know how history would judge him. He did not know if his name would be remembered with admiration or with blame. He only knew that the decision was his, and that the consequences, whatever they were, would be his as well. So he wrote the letter. He put it in his pocket, and he gave the order. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the weight of that night alongside Eisenhower, please like the video. Subscribe for more WWII documentaries that go beyond events and focus on the human moments behind history. And comment below. If you were in Eisenhower's place, would you have written that letter